For the 15th year in a row, the city of Quiescence hosted its spectacular Hush Hush Street Parade, a civic experiment dreamed up by a mayor who loved festivals but loathed noise complaints. The single rule was printed on every banner hanging from every lamppost. Absolutely no audible sound. Violators, the posters warned, would be escorted away by the parade librarians, roving ushers in tweed who wielded oversized paddles like lollipops of intimidation, clattering tap dancers, yodeling jugglers, and one tragically enthusiastic bagpiper had all fallen under the librarian's silent dragnet in previous years. Consequently, participants had learned to rehearse their acts with monk-like restraint, inventing new ways of being loud without actually making noise. Which brings us to this year's Showdown. On one side marched the Quiescence High Decibels, the most competitive teenage marching band in 3 counties. Their slogan, "If you can't feel it in your spleen, we're not done," normally made neighbors hide their pets. But for the Hush Hush Parade, the Decibels were required to leave their trademark thunder in the band room. They arrived armed with brass and drums, yet forced to treat every instrument like a prop in a Mimes window display. On the opposite curb, stretching invisible ropes and polishing invisible glass, loomed les Mimes magnifiques. Their leader, Marcel the Unmouthed, had imported graduates from Paris, Prague, and New Jersey. They wore the classic black and white uniforms, plus little silver pins shaped like zippers, as if to remind everyone that their lips were double-locked. No one remembered who insulted whom first. Some say it started when a decibel trombonist practiced a silent but flamboyant slide motion, too close to Marcel's invisible box. Others blame the day the Mimes rehearsed a routine in the school parking lot and pretended to drag a rope that coincidentally tripped the band director. Whatever the spark, rivalry turned to open antagonism. And this year, both groups, after separate secret petitions, had been scheduled for the same 20-minute slot in front of City Hall. Prime Parade Real Estate. Chief Parade Librarian Agnes Thistlewhite sensed trouble. She cracked open her ruler-length decibel meter and reminded herself that it was more decorative than functional. "May the hush be with me," she whispered, then marched off to patrol. The air on Maple Avenue shimmered with anticipation and suppressed giggles. Spectators formed 2 human arenas along the curb. Band parents versus mime aficionados. The parents donned t-shirts reading "Silence is overrated" and carried foam fingers shaped like trumpets. The mime fans wore black gloves and occasionally clasped their own throats in wordless solidarity. A whistle that emitted no sound signaled the start. First came the Decibels, 48 strong, stepping in angular formation. Every musician wore rubber practice pads over their shoes to eliminate footfall, so the only hint of motion was visual. Shimmering plumes, bobbing tubas, drumsticks that scissored the air at 120 beats per minute, if anyone could hear them. To compensate for the absent boom, the percussion line had attached tiny LED strips to their sticks. Each ghostly strike flashed red, blue, or gold. The audience could follow the rhythm by light alone. Drum Major Clarissa, kick, drum. McCoy balanced on her podium like a mute hawk. With her right hand, she drew invisible eighth notes. With her left, she pointed her baton at the heavens, then swooped it across with such ferocity that 2 piccolo players ducked on instinct. The band performed Rhapsody in Blue at full pantomime volume, cheeks puffed and arms quivering. Every player certain that if devotion were decibels, the city would be shaking. When the imaginary final chord struck, Clarissa flung her baton skyward. On a normal day, the maneuver would end in a crash of cymbals. Today, it ended in nothing whatsoever, except the baton did not return to Earth. A mime had caught it. Marcel the Unmouthed emerged from his troop's formation. wearing a smile so smug it practically chorused. He twirled the captured baton like a majorette, then pretended to snap it across one knee. The audience gasped in unison, their collective inhale an actual audible rustle that earned a dozen librarian glares. Clarissa mouthed something that 50% of onlookers identified as "give that back." Marcel responded by inventing a silent trumpet solo. He puffed imaginary valves with a stolen baton, while goose-stepping in place. The Decibels clarinet section, enraged, launched its counter-offensive. They executed the pretend playoff. Each reed player flung her clarinet up, caught it behind the back, spun once, then fell into a split while fingering an invisible glissando. It was as if the instruments were swords, and they, the fiddlers, silent musketeers. Not to be outdone, Les Mimes Magnifiques opened an invisible door, ushered each other through, and slammed it behind them with collective body language so exaggerated that one felt the vibration. They materialized imaginary trombones, complete with slides that goose-noted over bystanders' heads. Two mimes pretended to be sound waves. They rippled their torsos outward, arms undulating, as if pressing against some unseen barrier. Spectators craned their necks, trying to feel the phantom vibrations. Meanwhile, clarinetist Rosie Rodriguez of the Decibels noticed that Marcel was juggling the confiscated baton along with two imaginary bowling pins. Her inner marching band code of honor blazed. She bent over a xylophone player, who was of course not allowed to strike actual keys, and used the mallets as makeshift stilts, vaulting into the mime ranks. Mid-air, she snatched the baton, and upon landing, spun into a silent pirouette, so dramatic it could be heard. Chief Librarian Thistlewhite lifted her paddle, finger hovering near the shocky side, as though weighing a traffic violation that technically did not yet exist. Satisfied that no decibel had been born, she lowered the paddle, but kept it cocked like a loaded whisper. Battle lines crystallized. The parade route widened. Spontaneous semicircles of supporters formed like parentheses around a giant unsaid sentence. The band parents began a coordinated but strictly lip-silent chant, "Play the loud rest," each word accompanied by hulking hand gestures shaped like notes. From across the gulf, mime aficionados answered with a synchronized gesture, index finger laid across lips, the other hand making a zero, unspoken shorthand for sound nil. The Decibels switched tactics. Clarissa signaled the brass into the dreaded lean-back crescendo, a move first practiced by accident when someone slipped on a spilled sports drink. All brass players reclined nearly horizontal, bells skyward, a pose that, if noise were permissible, would send a tuba tsunami into the stratosphere. Instead, they released bursts of confetti cannons installed in their bells, silent eruptions of color that drifted down like neon snowfall. Marcel counterpunched. He drew in the air with an invisible lasso, looped it around the rainbow confetti, and pretended to pull it back into the muted dimension. His followers grabbed non-existent paint rollers and wiped away the confetti one speck at a time, making huge cleaning motions. The actual confetti remained, but the mime spell was persuasive enough that some children blinked, wondering if the colors were disappearing or if their eyes were on the fritz. Sensing the stakes, Clarissa activated the secret weapon, the boomless bass drum. Percussionist Gary Kickstand Del Toro hoisted the largest drum anyone had ever seen. A 10-foot cylinder on wheels, its head covered not with synthetic skin, but with a full LED panel. A snug harness let him march while programming images on a handheld tablet. At Clarissa's command, he mimed striking the drum. Each silent blow triggered ripples of animated light, concentric circles expanding in electric blue, overlapping like visual thunderclaps. The crowd erupted in "ooh," which, though technically audible, lasted under half a second. Thistlewhite's decibel meter bobbed in warning, but compassion for human wonder stayed her paddle. The mimes huddled. Marcel drew chalk lines in the air. One mimed fainting, another pretended to defibrillate him, and suddenly the troop burst apart like a flock of spring-loaded sparrows, revealing their own masterpiece, the wall of wardrobe. They produced a roll of invisible fabric, and by group charade, sewed a curtain, lifted it, and mounted it onto two mime poles that didn't exist anywhere outside collective belief. Then they stepped behind the non-existent curtain and began changing clothes. In seconds, they emerged sporting new costumes, swaggering as pirates, stuttering as robots, sashaying as flamenco dancers, all without adding a prop or removing an article of clothing. The transformation was so uncanny, it fooled the eyes. One grandma blinked thrice and whispered, audibly alas, "Where did they find a parrot?" Before clapping a hand over her mouth in terror, the decibels staggered, temporarily disarmed by the power of unaltered costume. But music kids, when cornered, have an evolutionary reflex. More choreography. The color guard emerged with rifles turned lightsabers, clear acrylic rods fitted with LED strips. They spun them at whip speed, forming holographic tunnels of color. Then guards tossed rifles high, catching them behind backs with a flourish of near-soundless wind shear. The only noise a faint whoosh, accompanied by collective tension in throats. Marcel recognized an arms race when he saw one. He raised his hands, palms forward, and parted them slowly. His troop mimed a window opening. One by one, the mimes climbed an invisible staircase, stepping onto an invisible balcony. They looked down upon the marching band with practiced haughtiness. Marcel produced an imaginary cannon, lit an imaginary fuse, and pantomimed firing himself across the chasm, or he would have, had not the band's sousaphone section intercepted. A quartet of tubas coordinated a twirl, their circular bells becoming golden hoops. They rolled toward Marcel like four silent boulders. The mime leapt an invisible trampoline, soared above the hoops in slow-motion ballet, then landed in what should have been a thunderous split. Even the parade librarian's eyelid twitched at the phantom impact. At that moment, a stray dog chosen by destiny and questionable dietary habits trotted between the armies. Around its neck dangled a single cowbell stolen, perhaps, from a previous parade casualty. No one noticed the dog until its collar let out a soft but undeniable clunk against a metal parking sign. In another context, a small metallic clonk would be nothing. But here, where absolute silence reigned, it echoed like a firecracker in a funeral. The librarian's decibel meters activated like an FBI sting. Agnes Thistlewhite's pupils dilated. She raised the paddle over her head. All performers froze. The decibels risked disqualification if any sound, even canine, could be linked to their presence. The mimes, historically allergic to being upstaged by any noise, saw an opportunity. A single tear, probably glycerin, maybe method acting, rolled down Marcel's cheek. He pointed an accusing finger at the dog, then at the band, implying ownership. The band pointed at the mimes. The dog inspected a lamppost. Agnes marched to the epicenter. She knelt by the dog, read its tag, Bongo, and gave it 3 brisk ear scratches. Bongo wagged happily. Clonk, clonk, clonk! Gasps fluttered across the crowd like startled pigeons. Clarissa's brain sprint searched for loopholes. Bongo's collar had broken the silence. Yes, but Bongo wasn't on their roster. She inhaled slowly, then lifted her baton, the real one now back in her possession, and pointed it straight at the cowbell. Gary Kickstand caught her meaning. He programmed the boomless bass drum screen to display a perfectly synchronized cartoon cowbell that lit up each time Bongo moved. With a flourish, the entire percussion line adopted invisible cowbells, swinging arms in unison, mouths agape, as though they'd become church bells at Christmas. Except absolutely no audio left their lips. It looked as though the dog were the honored guest musician. Marcel counterattacked by adopting Bongo as a mime apprentice. He crouched, coaxed the dog with an invisible treat, and within seconds pretended to tie a sleek invisible scarf around its neck. Les Mimes Magnifiques knelt and conjured a phantom pedestal. They lifted Bongo, though in reality the dog remained forepaws on pavement, tongue out, thoroughly living its best life. The spectators no longer knew where to look. The band illustrated their silent cowbell groove with kicks straight out of a Broadway tap number, while the mimes posed in treble clef configurations around Bongo, each using their hands to form parentheses of reverence. Just when equilibrium seemed impossible, fate intervened in the form of Grandma, the same one who earlier hallucinated a parrot. She shuffled past the librarians and placed a sausage roll, pilfered from her purse, between the rivals, directly in Bongo's line of sight. Then she stepped back, whispering, "May the odds be ever in your flavor." This too was audible, but the librarians were too enchanted by sausage diplomacy to chide her. Bongo sniffed, Bongo lunged, cowbell clonked, visions of disqualification flared in both camps. Reflexes diverged. The decibels executed emergency form delta. Musicians parted into two human tunnels, their instruments forming an archway. The idea was to funnel the dog harmlessly through and out of judging range. Les Mimes Magnifiques adopted invisible wall maneuver. They conjured a barrier perpendicular to the band's tunnel to redirect Bongo toward the mime side. Dog acceleration approached comedic blur. One moment, Bongo was sniffing pastry. The next, he charged the invisible wall, and encountering only air, burst through. Mimes gasped, holding their throats as though feeling the thud. Bongo skittered, pivoted, and shot down the band's human tunnel, tail wagging like a pendulum on espresso. Each pass beneath an arching trumpet bell caused another faint clonk. The band turned this to their advantage. Horns dipped in perfect handshake. Lights flashed from percussion. The dog became inadvertently metronome and soloist. Marcel faced defeat. His troop's wall routine shattered. Their pedestal dogs stolen by showboating band kids. Desperation hatched. He mimed, pulling a giant lever. The troop responded by pretending to crank a massive volume knob, labeled 1 to 11. They spun the knob past 11 to an imaginary 99, then braced as though a subwoofer under their feet roared to life. They trembled, cheeks fluttered, hair whipped backward in a non-existent gale. The audience felt vibrations that weren't there. The brain's mirror neurons tricked into hearing. Clarissa knew the science favored the mimes. She must escalate beyond hearing entirely. Vision? Already claimed. Taste? Too messy. Smell? Fraught with dog involvement. Touch? That was it. She whirled on kickstand. Out came a remote. He pressed a button, and the boomless bass drum ejected dozens of balloons. Helium filled, each carrying a small cardstock card. Balloons floated over band, mimes, and spectators alike. On the front of each card, feel the music. On the back, a square of holographic fabric. Anyone who rubbed the swatch activated a microcapsule of cooling menthol gel that sent a tingle across fingertips, like goosebumps in lotion form. Parents had purchased cases using bake sale money. Today, they served as tactile symphonies. Children popped up on tiptoes, rubbing the cards. Gasps, again audible but minor, rose as fingertips tingled. A shared sensory ripple passed through the crowd. People closed eyes and swayed, feeling a wave that bypassed ears entirely. Even the parade librarians succumbed. Agnes let a grin slip before slapping it back into neutrality. Les Mimes Magnifiques stared at the airborne carnival of sensation. Marcel recognized enemy genius and bowed. By tradition, any public mime bow accepts defeat or applauds equality. But Clarissa, seizing the moral high ground, returned the bow. She stepped forward, baton in salute, gestured for the mimes to join the band's block. Marcel considered. He poked a finger through his invisible zipper, pantomimed unfastening, and flashed a wordless smile that might have been all right. He signaled his troop, and together they infiltrated the band's ranks, fitting between trombones and clarinets like parentheses of silence. Each mime borrowed an instrument, handling it respectfully, though still silent. Band kids mimed along, adopting gloved hand motions. The crowd erupted, quietly, in massive jazz hands. The approved applause of the hush-hush parade. Fingers fluttered like butterflies at dawn. The final tableau. Balloon canopy overhead. Dog asleep atop the boomless bass drum. Brass and mime united in hush-made harmony. Somewhere a lone librarian dabbed away a tear of low-decibel joy. Minutes later, Mayor Ellery spoke. Not aloud, but through a hastily scrawled chalkboard hoisted from the reviewing stand. Winners, everyone. Encore request, continue being awesome. Noise citations, dog only, waved for cuteness. And so the silent showdown became legend. The Decibels and Les Mimes Magnifiques started touring joint workshops, teaching how to be loud without making a sound. Enrollment exploded. Clarissa and Marcel co-authored a best-selling picture book, The Day the Street Heard Nothing. Bongo starred in the movie adaptation, where ironically, he was voiced by a famous tenor. As for the parade librarians, they lobbied for stricter hush codes, but secretly kept one holographic card apiece, saved for sleepless nights when the city felt too quiet, even for them. They'd rub the swatch, fingertips tingling, and remember the day silence made the loudest cheer anyone never heard.